Welcome to session 4 of my creation course. And the last time we looked at day 1 and we saw that the light was revealed, water covered the earth, and the day was defined as a 24-hour period. We also discovered that the use of any gap theories or day age theories to kind of meld the evolution and creation thoughts just does not work. They're totally opposite each other and there's no middle ground. So now we go into session 4 and we look at day 2 and day 3 of creation. So I'm going to start by reading from Genesis 1, 6 to 8. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day." So in day 2 now, the earth was completely covered in water, and he separates the water from the water below and the water above. Now, what's it mean by water above? It could mean clouds. It could mean a canopy, like a thin layer of water between the surface of the earth and in the atmosphere. It could be even higher. Could mean a combination of the above. So if we look at the canopy theory, there was a completely different scenario before Noah's flood on planet Earth. Fossils of tropical plants in the Arctic have been found. Maybe these lands were closer to the equator then, and maybe not. There might have been a thin water layer giving the whole Earth a uniform temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It would be similar to having a greenhouse in the winter where you're nice and warm inside and the sun's shining. So, but some people now suggest that the canopy theory would have made the Earth too hot, and people smarter than I have said that about a meter thickness of water vapor would be too much. But it could have been less than a meter, easily enough. Also, people lived longer before the flood, so there was some kind of atmospheric difference that made them live longer. Plants were bigger, animals were bigger, people lived longer. Now, I've come up with a timeline here, and I'll insert it right now. And as you can see from the timeline, Noah might have still been living when Abraham was born, because Noah lived to the age of 950 years. So that means he was about 349 or 50 years after the flood that he was still living. And so just when about Abraham was being born, Noah might still have been alive. Now, the other theory about the waters above is that it could even be out in outer space. There's possibly water previously on Mars. There's erosion, as you can see from this photo. If there was water on Mars, it could account for the source of some of the water for Noah's flood. Comets have an ice core. And one of the important things about water, a property of water that's unique for water, is that when it freezes, it expands. So therefore, ice is lighter than a liquid water, which is very important because if it contracted when it froze like everything usually does, Then a body of water, the ice would sink and completely fill the body of water with ice over time, killing everything that's in that lake or water body. So, because it expands when it freezes, it's lighter than liquid water and therefore floats on top, protecting the life underneath the ice. Now, day 2 is the only day not listed as good. And why might that be? Well, if we continue to read in Genesis 9 to 13, we see that God, and let me read it for you. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So the probability that there was not mentioned, that good was not mentioned in day 2 was because God was not finished separating it. First, he separated the water from below to the water above, and on day 3, he separated the water from land. So there's actually 2 goods in day 3. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 3rd day. So here's the 2 goods. First, when he finished separating, he called it good. When he saw land and water separated, it was good. And now when dry land was created, obviously the rocks that make up dry land and the soils were also created on that time. So let's look at some rock types. The first type is igneous, which is from volcanic activities and usually created well within the earth. Then there's sedimentary. And as we look later on, when we look at Noah, most of the earth's crust is sedimentary. 70% is sedimentary, which means that it's been set down in layers over a short period of time. And then also the last type of rock that we have is metamorphic, which has gone under pressure and metamorphosized or changed into something other than it was. Now, minerals were also created when land was created. And here's a few pics that I have of minerals that I've taken from Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto and also the Ottawa Museum of Natural Sciences. There's only 4 here, but it's only a sampling of what I have in my book, which is due to be released in August 2021. Now, once the dry land appeared, God could create the plants, and that is an incredible variety there. The plants that I'm talking about range from algae to trees. So first of all, we start with the simple and work our way to the complex. So we have algae, fungi, lichen, mosses, liverworts, hornworts. These were all created on day 3. Now, Pteridophyta is a vascular plant that has roots, stems, and leaves but lacks flowers or seeds, such as the fern, which reproduces from spores underneath the leaves. Now, the Phanerogamia gams are seed-bearing plants, and they include the trees, mostly the trees. So we have two types of trees, really. We have the coniferous and we have the deciduous. The coniferous would be what we term evergreens, and some people call all evergreens pines, but that is, of course, a misnomer. Then the second type, the deciduous ones, are called angiosperms, and they have seeds in protective coverings. So first, let's look at the seed-bearing plants that don't have it in the fruit. So we have the pines, the larches, the spruces, the hemlocks, the firs, the arborvitaes or cedars, the cypresses, the junipers, the yews, and each one of those has different species within them. Then if we go on to the deciduous ones, the ones that lose their leaves, and by the way, the conifers also lose leaves. Their leaves are called needles, and about a third of their needles die off every year. So every 3 years, it's a brand new branch. So they too lose their needles, but not like the deciduous trees that lose their leaves completely every year. So we have the willows, the poplars, the walnuts, the hickories, the birches, the alders, the beeches, the elms, the tulip tree, the pawpaw, the sassafras, the sycamores, the cherries and the plums, the honey locusts and the Kentucky coffee tree, the basswoods and dogwoods, the ashes, the maples, the oaks. There's so many varieties of plants. It's incredible that it was all created on day 3, and yet it was. So there's the two goods, second one after he did the plants. Now, the dry land would also mean that the rest of the elements were also created on day 3. The word kind from verses 11 and 12, that is crucial. What we're called kinds in the Bible, we now call families. So just for an example, there's 620 plant families, such as the rose family or any other family. Each family has many species. Now, within these species, actually I should say within these families, the genetic makeup was there from day 3 to create the varieties that we have. Not necessarily having all the particular millions of plants that we have now. There might have been like one rose, and it developed into different species of roses because the genetic information in its seeds was there for diversification. And now, since plants cannot go gathering food for themselves, they have a unique mechanism of making food themselves called photosynthesis. Now, that is quite the process. Photosynthesis occurs when plants use light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. Leaves contain microscopic cellular organelles known as chloroplasts. Each chloroplast contains a green-colored pigment called chlorophyll. Light energy is absorbed by chlorophyll molecules, whereas carbon dioxide and oxygen enter through the tiny pores of the stomata located in the epidermis of the leaves. Another byproduct of photosynthesis is sugars, such as glucose and fructose. These sugars are then sent to the roots, stems, leaves, fruits, flowers, and seeds. In other words, these sugars are used by the plants as an energy source, which helps them to grow. These sugar molecules then combine with each other to form more complex carbohydrates like cellulose and starch. The cellulose is considered as the structural material that is used in plant cell walls. the byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. And since we need oxygen, plants are a good thing for us. Now, plants also need carbon dioxide, and we give off carbon dioxide, so we are beneficial to the plants. It's a symbiotic relationship that God has designed. So, back to the trees though. We have 110 species in Canada, and when I was in forestry school, we had to know every single one of them, and that at first seemed like a very daunting task. However, once we were told what to look for, it became quite easy. Now, for the sake of time, I'm only going to touch on the maples and the oaks to tell you what the differences are within the species of those genuses. So maples always have their branching come out opposite each other. So you have the main stem, and then the branch comes off perfectly opposite each other, as do the leaves on that branch. They come out perfectly opposite each other. Now, some maple leaves have no teeth whatsoever on the edges, like our Canadian sugar maple, which is the national tree of Canada. That's the one on the flag. It has no small teeth on the edges, whereas the red maple and silver maple and most of the others have small little teeth on the edges of them. And the shapes vary a little. And if we're looking at syrup, for instance, maple syrup, here's just some interesting facts for you. The sugar maple takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup, and the red maple takes 60 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. Both are fine, but of course, obviously, you want the sugar maple because it produces more for less. So the best time, if you were ever interested in harvesting the sap from sugar maple, the best location is on a south slope, and the best time is in the spring when the temperatures reach about 5 degrees above 0 Celsius, and at night about 5 degrees below Celsius. In that range, they run the best. And here's pictures of some maples that I've taken over the years. Now, the oaks, there's two basic categories for the oaks. We have the pointed teeth ones and the rounded teeth ones, and that's the major difference. Now, unlike the maple, oaks do not come opposite each other in their branching or leaves. They come alternately, so one here, one up there, one there. And the oaks with rounded leaves include the white oak, Garry oak, bur oak, swamp white oak. Those are all with rounded leaves. And then we have the oaks with pointed leaves, and red oaks are the most common here in Ontario and Quebec, and most of eastern Canada, really. But there are, of course, white oaks as well, which you can tell the difference because one is rounded and one is pointed. So also with the pointed leaves, we have black oak and pin oak. There's one kind of in between, couldn't make up its mind, I guess. It was a chinkapin oak, which is a combination of pointed and round. So here's some pictures of oak leaves. Before I conclude this session, I'd like to share some of my flower pictures. I have thousands, but I'm only going to show a few. There's more in my book when it comes out. Now, in conclusion, day 2 and day 3 are the days we see atmosphere created, that means the air that we breathe, and dry land that we walk on. Dry land is needed for most plants, which were also created on day 3. And on day 3 also the aquatic plants were created, so all the kelp and everything else that's under the waters, water lilies, all those were also created on day 3. So it's an incredible amount of creation going on, especially for day 3. Now, as I said, plants require carbon dioxide, and we give off carbon dioxide. We need oxygen, plants give off oxygen. So that is why plants were created, because we needed them. Plus, of course, there's the vegetables and everything else that we get from plants that we use in our day-to-day lives. Plants were created in their families, and there are 620 different plant families, each with many different species of plants within them. Also, you cannot plant a tomato seed and expect a carrot. That's what it means by after its kind. It always develops after its genetic makeup. You cannot plant anything into the ground and expect something else to come out of it. It is what it is. Cucumbers produce cucumbers, and tomatoes produce tomatoes. You won't get any crossbreeding there, and all the information for the development of the plant is in that seed, and that is a miracle in itself. The microscopic detail of the complete plant is located within that seed. All the genetic makeup for the different genus, or the different species of that plant is there in that seed. So that brings us to the end of session 4. And as always, I look forward to your comments and questions and the things that are like. The internet way of teaching is certainly a new experience for me, and it's certainly harder than having a live audience. So I really welcome your comments. Thanks again for watching. See you the next time.